Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 310 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson Mummy. I'll be joined by Megan Saya in just a few minutes to talk about all things that have happened in the bar exam this week. And it has been, not surprisingly, another crazy week with absolutely unprecedented actions. And we're beginning to pick up the pace now again in terms of decisions that are being made by different jurisdictions around the country. So we'll bring you up to date on the latest breaking information and buckle in. It's going to be a bumpy ride, that's for sure. If this is your first time on the podcast, well, welcome. We're glad you're here. This is definitely the place to come for information about the bar exam and all things bar exam related. We provide these podcasts in both video and audio format. If you'd like to watch today's episode, you can go to celebrationbarreview.com/310. That's the episode number 310. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio, radio.com, Spotify, and lots of other places where podcasts are syndicated. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. Now, before we jump into the update with Megan, I want to just remind all of you that we have a special free training webinar that we're offering right now. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take the Bar Exam, Why You Should Ignore the Crowds and the Fear. We've been offering this webinar training for a couple of months since the pandemic really began, and the response to it has been just terrific. And we really encourage you to join us. We're going to talk about the strategy for people who are taking the bar exam in 2020 or even into 2021. And we're going to show you why this actually is the best time to take the bar exam in spite of all the craziness that's going on. The training lasts about an hour, and for about the last 15 minutes or so of the presentation, I take live questions and answers, or take live questions and I try to provide the answers more specifically. And it's really a great opportunity for you to ask me anything specifically that you want to know about your jurisdiction or about your particular circumstance. To register for this training, all you have to do is click on the show notes link or the button on the video page, and you'll be registered. We're offering the training webinar on Saturdays and Tuesdays, so you can pick the date that works best for you. And even if you can't get to the live showing, we'll send you a replay, so it's really worthwhile to register for this special training. If you want to know more about the training, you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/now. We've got all the details, and you can register from there as well. So look forward to seeing you on Saturday or Tuesday, bringing you up to date on everything that's happened right up to that minute and showing you why now is the best time to take the bar exam. So we look forward to seeing you there. All right, well, let's jump into all of the news that has occurred. It was a busy week for sure, and Megan and I recap it in this upcoming segment. Well, Megan, let's go ahead and jump into what has been another extraordinary week, even up to just a few minutes ago. More breaking news and more, really a little more clarity, frankly, and I'm excited about that. But I'm going to let you do various things. We got a lot of different strands of news coming up in the last week.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to start with the first one that came down, which came down kind of over the weekend. Washington State, their Washington Supreme Court issued an order that temporarily modifies their rules to grant a permanent diploma privilege to every applicant who was currently registered to take the July or September 2020 exams, who graduated from an ABA accredited law school. So that is huge. We've never seen anything like that. Wisconsin is the closest. They have this sort of permanent, if you went to a Wisconsin law school, you get to practice law after you graduate in the state of Wisconsin. This, though, in Washington it doesn't matter if you had failed before. It didn't matter which law school you went to around the country, as long as it was ABA accredited. It was, however, as soon as they closed registration, then they made this announcement. So it was not retroactive. You couldn't sign up for the exam after they made the announcement. But this is, I mean, it's pretty gigantic that they decided to do this.
There's a lot to unpack here. One piece of this, I think, is based on some other information we're getting from other states. I'm wondering if we have fewer people that are sitting for the exam, and so there's a real concern in some jurisdictions that they might not have had enough new attorneys. In other words, Washington State seems to be particularly interested in providing legal services for indigent citizens, for people that typically are priced out of the legal market. And this actually, they even had what appears to be like a paralegal licensing component to this as well. So it's possible that so many people ran away from the exam that now they're trying to entice people into the bar with this remarkable step. So I think that's one piece to keep in mind. Another, I suppose, that we've got to really talk about is who's not eligible. If you had signed up for the Washington State Bar exam for the July sequence.
For September. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, September. Did you automatically get waived in? And the answer is no. There are some groups that will not be admitted here. And the biggest part of these would be foreign trained attorneys who had done LLMs. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So now what happens? Will Washington give a bar exam?
Yes, they will. They will be giving the bar exam in the July and the September 2020 dates. And
so 2 dates. Right,
2 dates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
2 dates. They are really, though, only saying this is basically for foreign trained attorneys or for, because we can talk about this too, or for people who are registered to take the bar in the state of Washington, but they need a UBE score. So they need to transfer it out of state.
Right. So one thing to understand here is that if you got waived into Washington State, if you happen to get in before they close the door, that doesn't allow you to transfer that anywhere else. That is only to practice in Washington State. So let's say that you're registered to take the bar exam in Washington, you're a foreign trained attorney, and I know we've got some people in that situation. You would still have to take the bar exam. Now, who else is taking the bar exam? Well, it seems to me that's all that's taking the bar exam, and a few stray people that wanted to have a transferable score, but wanted to take it physically in Washington State. And so I think it's going to be a very odd pool of applicants. I mean, I'm not even exactly sure what we're dealing with. It may be a very small group of people, and because it's going to 2 different dates, even smaller still. I really wonder if, they had a party and no one decided to come. So this is one strand. You want to talk about another state that kind of is discussing this?
Well, I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to, but I do know that Oregon, their neighboring state, the law schools thought this sounded like a really good idea, and so started making some noise about wanting it and petitioning the state bar, and the state bar said no. They will be giving an exam. So good try by Oregon. It was worth a shot. But I think it is really interesting that the more creative we see these states getting, which we're going to get into some more creative ideas that states have had, but the more creative we're seeing these states getting, other states are going to start wanting to copy that as well. So certainly, Oregon and Washington being neighbors, I think it made a lot of sense that Oregon would say, hey, look, our situation really isn't that different than Washington State's. We have the same concerns. Maybe we should just follow suit and go ahead and do it just for this. And I should say, this is, again, I want to emphasize, just for the 2020 exams. So starting, as of right now, starting February 2021, Washington State, everyone will have to take the exam again. And
just to remind everybody, Washington State earlier in the month lowered their passing score for this exam. So that was the first thing they did. Apparently, I think they didn't get enough takers. So then they said, well, okay, that's not enough. So now we go to this second tier. I mean, it's sort of the reverse of New York, isn't it? Tier 1, tier 2, and Washington's like, okay, here's our first step, here's our second step. And then Oregon, in typical Oregonian fashion, says, well, if they did it, why don't we do it? And I can understand why law school deans would love this idea, right? Our law school education is so amazing, you shouldn't have to take the bar exam. Now, clearly, I have a vested interest in having the bar exam. But I'm not too worried about the future of the bar exam. And I think that the problem is that the reality is that the bar examiners very quickly in Oregon said, no, that's not on the plate at all. So I don't think this will be the only state where we hear from law school deans, saying, well, look what they did in Washington, because now they've got something to point to. We have never had that other than Wisconsin, as you pointed out. So I suspect we'll get that some other places, but I also expect most of the bar examiners are going to say, no way. Right. I think something else was really going on in Washington.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it is worth noting that Washington was hit hard and hit early by coronavirus. And so there just might be that the people in that state were a bit more skittish about signing up for the exam. Yeah. I'm just not sure because they haven't released that information. But yeah, I wouldn't expect there to be automatic permanent, diploma waivers in any other jurisdiction. But, honestly, I wouldn't have expected that in Washington State either. So, yeah. Okay. So another big change that happened this week, just a couple of days ago or maybe yesterday, they're all blending together for me, is Maryland. So Maryland is a UBE state, but they are the second jurisdiction to opt for the special online exam October 5th and 6th. So they will no longer be doing just for this jurisdiction, they're not doing any July or September exams. They are also that means it's not a portable score. It's written by the national conference, but it is not a UBE test. So they will give refunds if you don't want to take it. This test would only license you as of right now in Maryland. But there's a lot of
problem. Because there were people who were registered in Maryland to take the UBE who had bailed out of DC, for example, right, because DC had indicated early on they weren't going to do a test. So I suspect there were people that switched over to the Maryland UBE who are now shut out. There's no UBE in Maryland for this right, administration. And it's too late, I think, to get into a UBE jurisdiction. I could be wrong. There could be some place that's still taking it, but I think generally speaking, you're foreclosed now from the July-September technique. So that's one part of it. Mm-hmm. This is the second state to jump on Plan B from the national conference. We're going to talk about California in a minute, but right now we've got two definitive jurisdictions going for this test. And the good news about it, I mean, maybe there's some other good news, but the good news is for the first time, we now know what the test is going to be about. So let's break that down for people as well.
So it's basically exactly what we assumed it would be, but Maryland's the first state to come out and say it. So there will be 1 MPT, 3 MEEs, which are the essays, and 100 MBE questions. So it's basically split right down the middle. However, it's still over 2 days. I believe they said 4 90-minute sessions. Yeah. So, and what we know, we'll get into it a bit more when we talk about the baby bar rules that have been given out. We do expect that with these online exams, it will take a very long time administratively. So I think it's smart to continue to do it over 2 days, even though the exam is half as long, because there is a lot of procedural things that have to happen. Yeah. It will take a very long time to check people in and out and make things secure and, combat cheating. And so because of that, it makes sense that they've split the exam in half, but yet it's still going to be 2 days of work.
So just to again, to emphasize, it's 3 essays, 1 performance test, 100 multiple choice questions. Now, there's a lot about that. It makes the test dramatically less reliable. Statistically, fewer essays, fewer multiple choice questions make the test way, way, way less reliable. I mean, by more than 50%. I mean, it's not just doing half the exam makes it half less reliable. It's exponential. That's why it's not portable and why the national conference doesn't want to do it. However, so that's one piece. The second piece is the examiners in Maryland are going to grade that exam independently. The examiners in DC will grade it independently. There will be no equating of scores. You can't equate a 100-question multi-state because the original multi-state that you're equating to was given in 1973, and it was a 200-question exam. So you can't equate it. So scaling is not going to be part, I don't think, of the transaction here. In other words, I think your raw score in the 100 questions will turn out to be your real score. I don't think you're going to see a bump for scaling because there's no way to scale it. Now, I want to be really clear. I haven't seen that in writing. Nobody has said it yet. You heard it here first. But there isn't any way that I've been thinking about it since you slacked me at 11 p.m. last night about it. At 3 a.m., I started thinking about it. I thought, how would you equate that? Would you give a scale? And I don't see a way to do it. I don't think you can take half the scale and add it. That doesn't make any sense to me. The other thing to keep in mind about this is that it's going to cover all the same subjects. So you'll still have 7 subjects tested in the MBE. You'll still have, and I think Maryland said they'd use all the UBE subjects for the essays. So you've got 7 UBE plus 7 multi-state, so 14 potential subjects with 3 questions. And I assume DC would do the same. And then you've got a performance test. So you've got to study the same stuff. You're just going to have fewer questions to work with. So there's a lot going on there. You may have already said this and I just spaced out while you were talking about it. Maryland has indicated that they would like to discuss reciprocity with DC, right?
Right. So basically it's up to each individual jurisdiction to determine their state bar, to determine if they're going to allow scores from any other jurisdiction in theirs. So the NCBE has, because they made the UBE, they've kind of been seen as this sort of overarching, oh, well, we're just all reciprocal with one another and the scores are portable. But in reality, there's no one's really in charge of it other than the state bar themselves. And so Maryland can have reciprocity with anyone who's willing to have reciprocity with them. California could have reciprocity with anyone who wanted to have it with them. Now, most states did not choose to have reciprocity except for the ones who went into the UBE and they said we're good with allowing all the UBE scores because those scores are standard, right? So everyone took the same exact test. So they don't really care where you took it, where you physically took it. Well, Maryland decided because DC and Maryland they'll be taking the same test. They're working with the DC bar right now to establish reciprocity. We can imagine it will be successful because DC has every reason to go ahead and work with Maryland on that. Obviously, that's a huge crossover. We talked about that last week, that people who are members of the DC bar are also members of the Maryland, Virginia bar. That's obvious geographical reasons. But also Maryland has indicated that anyone else who jumps on this October 5th and 6th exam, they would like to they will work to try to establish reciprocity with them as well. This may make the October 5th and 6th exam more palatable, enticing to other UBE jurisdictions who don't want to give up their portability, the score portability for their examinees, but now maybe kind of feel like, oh, we've got a bit more wiggle room here. We can work something out.
Yeah, I think, when you double the number of jurisdictions giving the test, when you go from 1 to 2, I think that Maryland was sending a signal. I think that the subtext of their order was, come on in, guys, the water's fine. They were far more explicit about what the test was than what DC had said. And I agree with you. I think they're sending a signal to other jurisdictions. You ought to join us, offer this test, and we'll discuss reciprocity. We might be seeing the beginnings of an ad hoc second group of jurisdictions operating outside of the NCBE officially, but still using their materials. This is wild, isn't it? I mean, it's uncharted territory. They might just, if some of these jurisdictions want a bit more autonomy, the NCBE has really given them, I don't know that they meant to, but has given them this opportunity because the jurisdictions don't have to write their own exam, but yet they can cobble together their own little alliance of, hey, here's our states that we're cool with. And you might see them happen just geographically, perhaps you get a bit of a mid-Atlantic grouping that works together and says, hey, we're okay with each other. We'd like to stick together. I don't know. This is really interesting and really just, there's so many variables. So we're just going to have to wait and see. It's a long time till October. It's a long time and I would imagine a lot will change. Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. And I think we may see these ad hoc alliances come up and start to gain shape. It will be interesting to us, I think, to see what this next week holds. We went from one jurisdiction at DC down to two. If it follows the usual pattern, as soon as we sign off the webinar today, there will be, two more states that will announce that they've gone to Plan B. It never seems to fail. So I think we've got that possibility out there as well, and we'll keep you informed.
Say one more thing about Maryland. I thought it was really interesting, their rationale, and this I think because I do think it applies to a lot of states. Their rationale for moving to this online exam is that they came down and they said, for this exam, we got about 1,100 applicants.
That's right, yeah.
From at least 38 states, and at least 2 foreign countries. So, and as I said, this includes people coming from states where the rates of coronavirus cases are ticking up, which is quite a few states now. So I think that's really interesting and important for people to keep in mind, just as you're looking at your own state, is for a lot of these UBE jurisdictions, what happened was places like New York closed down. And so, or practically closed down. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but to anyone except for first-time takers. And other, Maine was very quickly filled up and then had to reopen again. A lot of these jurisdictions had people who clearly could not get in Tennessee. People couldn't get in unless they'd gone to Tennessee law schools. And so they had to go somewhere. So they went to other UBE jurisdictions to register. Well, then suddenly you've got states where they're giving the exam or they're set to give the exam in person, and they may be looking at their numbers and going, gosh, like maybe our state is doing fine, but we've got people coming in from all these other UBE jurisdictions where their states aren't handling it particularly well right now. And so that really exposes, they don't want to be, a super spreader event where it was like all these, 1,100 people came in from out of state and suddenly our state's got a crisis on its hands. So I thought that was very interesting that they explicitly talked about their numbers and how many out-of-state applicants they were dealing with. I think it's just something to keep in mind that the more that the fewer UBE jurisdictions are available to people, the more people from outside of that particular state are going to be coming in, which, raises concerns about air travel, people driving in and where they're coming from and what the, health situation was like where they're coming from. So.
Yeah. And I just want to remind people that on our website, we have a link to July 2020 exam changes, which shows all 50 states. And it's got a link. There's a link to the Maryland order. I would encourage you to read it. It's by far the most, I think, explicit discussion of this that I've seen anywhere in the country.
Okay. So now we can talk about California. All right.
I see a question online about if California keeps the online format, would it be worthwhile considering California now? I think that's a great question. We will come back to that and talk about it in terms of what we think California is going to do. I would say this, if California uses the October 5th and 6th date, it would appear to me that what they'll do is use their own essays and their own performance test, but they would be using just the 100 questions of the multi-state. And again, if it's not scaled, does that make it better or worse? It depends on what score you would need to pass this online exam. Remember, DC and Maryland haven't said what a passing score even is. So you're flying blind a lot, but it's a possibility. Anything that would reduce the score from 1440 in California or 144 is worth, considering. So should we transition over to California now and talk about that?
So there's a few things to talk about in California. One being that we talked about last week, California is considering moving to the October 5th and 6th exam. As we knew, California has not officially said they're doing an online test, but we know they really, really want to. It's looking increasingly likely that they will do an online test and not an in-person one. If they move to October 5th and 6th, it would allow them to use the MBE questions from the NCBE, and then they can use their own performance tests and essays, which California generally does. They do not. That's their normal pattern is they write their own performance tests, they have their own essays, and then they use the MBE from the national conference. So this would allow them to do that. It's just that the MBE numbers would presumably be these 100 questions as opposed to the normal 200.
Yeah. So, and again, because we don't know what a passing score would be, that makes it even more interesting. We don't have any definitive word from California because we think they're waiting on the baby bar exam to be given on Tuesday. So let's talk about the baby bar exam.
Right. Okay, so the baby bar is the exam in California that's given for people who go to certain law schools in the state. They have to take it after their first year of law school, and it's like a mini bar exam. It doesn't test all the subjects; it just tests a handful. It's kind of different, but in this case, it's really instructive because California is using it explicitly as a test case for online exams. So California has explicitly said, we're going to see how the baby bar goes, and then we'll have a better idea of how we're going to give the actual bar exam. So we look at the rules that they've given, and we don't know for sure what's going to happen on the real bar exam, the full bar exam, but they're helpful for knowing kind of the direction that the examiners are going.
Yeah, and what are the highlights of the rules?
Yeah, so they're very strict. A new sort of packet came out this week because they're set to take it on Tuesday. So we're almost there for the baby bar students. They do seem to be slightly more relaxed than the initial rules that came down. Like they now in this one we're saying like you can't have books like within
reach.
But again, we don't know what that means. And so we're still counseling students to don't give them any reason to say that you can't take the exam or that you're going to fail the exam. Just like don't have any books in the room, no electronics in the room, nothing that beeps or makes noises, anything like that. Basically, I would say anything that's plugged in or has a battery, like get it out of the room completely. No pets coming into the room. Obviously, no people coming into the room.
Or water.
No coffee or water.
This is absolutely explicitly forbidden.
They will be doing so the way Baby Bar works, you get like 15 minutes to do notes and then you get 45 minutes to write. And the way they're going to do it is, with that hour, you're going to do an hour and then you're done and you can get up and you can take a break for 15 minutes and then you come back and you get your next question. And so you cannot leave the room in the middle of a question. And there's no going back and forth between questions. So you take one question and then that question is done. And then the next, and then it's done. So you don't get a packet with everything all at once that you can allocate. So there's no like, oh, I've got 3 extra minutes. Let me move on to the next question. Can't do that.
Yeah. You are going to have a note space on your exam software to take notes, virtual notes. No paper in the room, so you can't take written notes. You can't have any paper. You can't write anything. No writing utensils in the room. I want to just segue for one quick second. I have been trying to figure out how you would do a performance test online. I cannot figure it out yet. I'm absolutely unclear about how that's going to happen. The performance test would have to be a much shorter package than it has been so far. And I think note taking is going to be horrific. I hope you're a photo reader because I think that's going to be the real godsend here. But when we start to get some indication of what an online performance test looks like, we're going to share it with you. But right now, we just don't know. Nobody has said. How do you do an online performance test? You know, a little screen up in the corner and you've got to flip through all the pages and keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It doesn't seem likely. So that's one problem. Now, the baby bar does not have a performance test, so that's not a concern for next week.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing that stood out to me about the baby bar was that they were going to do a complete verification, a security check before every segment, every question. You know, it's a one-day test, so it's a long day. And I don't know what they say, 15 minutes to go through that verification process before every question?
For every question, right. So that's why I was saying that administratively, anyone who's taking an online exam, it's going to take a very long time. So, work on your stamina now. You're not going to have to be thinking and reasoning through during that whole time, but just your brain, you will be wiped. If those of you who've taken the bar before, even under normal circumstances, you are physically and mentally exhausted after each day. Prepare for longer than they
and we've got some of our baby bar students who have graciously agreed to debrief us after the exam, not on the content of the exam, we're not doing that, but just on the logistics and the mechanics so that we can share back with you what that process appeared to be like. Because honestly, nobody knows. Until I feel sorry for the baby bar students. They are really guinea pigs here, and we'll see. And I'm sure the Cal Bar is going to want to know the same thing. So we'll hopefully next week we'll be able to update you guys on that. But it is weird to say the least. And I think the Cal Bar has to see how that goes before they make a decision about jumping to this October 5th and 6th, or even staying with September 9th and trying to go online with it. There is no way that I see a full-on 2-day bar exam with 5 essays and a performance test and 200 multiple choice questions. That just isn't going to happen. So if you're a Cal Bar taker, I don't think that's going to be your test. Forget about dates. It's just not going to be the test. It's got to be something that's shorter and more cut down, regardless of when it's given. And to me, the signs are pointing towards October 5th and 6th. I just think that's where they're going to end up.
Yeah, I just don't think there's any way they're going to have multiple choice if they do it in September. And I can't imagine them totally getting rid of the multiple choice for this exam.
Well, and I think as they start to actually work with a performance test online, it's going to become very obvious very quickly that it just can't be done. It's just, it's unnatural. It doesn't work. It's unfair. You're really testing somebody's computer skills as much as their writing or analytical skills. And that's just absurd to me.
One thing I will say that, and this is only for California or any states that use ExamSoft as a software, you can copy and paste from the note section into your actual essay. So that's good news. Like if you're using that software, I can't vouch for the other software yet, I don't know, but in that software for the Baby Bar, they are allowing them to copy and paste. So if you have typed up notes, you can put it directly into your essay. You don't have to retype anything. That might be a saving grace. And obviously, just like with your scratch paper in California, they just collect your scratch paper under normal test situations and then they shred it, get rid of it. Similarly, you don't have to erase anything that you put in the notes. They won't pay any attention.
Right. Well, all right. So that's California. Should we talk about what, New York next?
Yep. So we've got New York. Okay. So New York, they are now under Jackson's theory of maybe why some of these states are doing some wonky things, being that their application numbers are down. New York said that they have now opened up a 4th application period. So we're in the middle of that now. I know Jackson put a note, or June put a note on the Facebook group when it opened, but they opened it from June 18th through June 21st. They're accepting applications for candidates who graduated in 2018, 2019, or 2020 with a JD from any ABA accredited law school and who have already sat and failed one prior administration of the bar in New York. Okay, so if you have failed more than once, not you. If you failed in another jurisdiction that's not New York, not you. But if you graduated before 2018, not you. So again, very limited, but for New York, this is a much broader category than we have seen in the previous 3 application periods.
Yeah, and under the theory of unintended consequences, you and I were talking earlier in the week, and I don't know, it kind of suddenly dawned on us, you know what? The New York bar exam is going to be an exam of all first-time takers. That's never happened before. It might have occurred to the New York bar examiners about the same time. They're like, whoa, that's weird. What do we do with that? And how do we equate that? And how do we make that work? And I'm going to be really snarky here, but I think some of the big box bar reviews probably had the equivalent of a coronary when they realized that if it was a first-time taker bar exam, they would be naked and afraid, to quote the TV show, when the pass rate came out, because suddenly there's no place to hide, and I suspect there was some pressure that said, look, you gotta put some, from their standpoint, you got to put some chum in the water. You got to put some other people into this test, because if it's all first-time takers, we have a very, very weird pool. And it would have been the only exam in the country with just first-time takers. And I don't remember, I know there hasn't been a time in the bar exam we've ever had just first-time takers. It's unfair, it's discriminatory, it's wrong on so many levels. And quite frankly, I never thought they'd get to tier 4 in the applications. I suspect that a whole lot of people are just bailing, which is what we've said for months now, that we thought the best and brightest would probably step out of the exam entirely in this sequence. And so even though New York offered it to all the New York law grads who are first-time takers, and then the out of New York law grads who are first-time takers, I suspect a whole lot of them said, thanks, but no thanks. And so now we're down to this 4th tier. It's only a 3-day window. We'll see what happens. Could we go to a 5th window? We might. I just don't know. But if you're interested in New York, watch for these modifications. Keep a weather eye for what they're doing, because it could be that on the 22nd or 23rd of June, suddenly they say, okay, years 2012 to 2018. Now, I mean, I don't know. I feel like we're all trying to get on a Delta Airlines flight, don't you? Rows 12 through 35 can now board.
Yeah, it is very, very strange. And I just think there's no way they can give an exam without exposing a lot if there's only first-time takers taking it. Because repeat takers are used as an excuse by the state bars, to be perfectly honest. They're used as an excuse that the state bar can say, well, we only let in this certain amount of people because, so many of them were repeaters and who don't deserve to be attorneys in our eyes. And, we know that that's not true. We know that first-time takers fail all the time, but this will make it impossible to cover that up. So
you guys think I've been on a soapbox for the last 15, 20 years? Wait till after this exam. Okay, so in the interest of time, let's talk about Florida very quickly.
Yeah.
The one update there is that we now know that the Orlando location will be the Orlando Convention Center. It is a huge, huge, huge facility. Lots of hotels in the area along International Drive. We don't know how much of the convention center they're planning on taking. We also don't know how many people are enrolling, and we know there's lots of questions about the number of cases. Coronavirus cases continue to go up. We're hitting new highs every single day here in Florida. I don't think any of that deters the Florida bar examiners. I think that I believe this is political, not health. And I think they're going to just go on and give the exam, no matter what craziness is going on. And no matter how many people there are that are going to show up. So if you're a Florida bar taker, you should continue to plan on July 28th and 29th. Could they change it? Maybe, but I think the closer you get in, the harder it is for them to move. These are big deposits they got to make on these centers, and I just don't think they're going to walk away from that. It would be very surprising to me.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. All right, so we're going to move on now. Oh, I guess one last quick thing I'll say, because it's still speculative, is just for anybody who's California, know that California has commissioned a sort of task force that's looking at the future of the California bar exam. And one of the things that they are looking at, I wouldn't hold my breath, but they are looking at, is should California go to the UBE? So it's, who knows at this point, but I wouldn't plan on it. But they have explicitly said they have a task force that is looking into, should California go to the UBE or should they modify the existing bar exam? That's what I would bank on. I would imagine that coming out of this, they will change the format of the California bar exam.
Yeah, and to continue our theme of the emperor has no clothes, if California went to the UBE, they would have to show the UBE scoring system. And if you convert the current 1440 in California, as we've talked about, it's 288. 22 points higher than New York on the same exam, and 28 points higher than the lowest threshold for the UBE. You cannot justify a 28-point difference between Alabama and California. I don't care what. I mean, no politics aside here. You just can't do it. And I don't know that the Cal Bar wants to be exposed. They play these games with their scoring that make people think it's something completely different. It's just a shell game. And I'm amazed how many bar applicants fall for this and say, oh, I failed by 30 points. No, you failed by 3. Just divide everything by 10. It is a completely arbitrary, made up game by the Cal Bar. So
yes, I know that was really long. These have implications even if you're not in the specific states. Everything just seems to be bleeding together. So we knew we needed to really talk about these, because it might not be your state today, but it really could be your state tomorrow.
What's going on is unprecedented. It's huge. It's got implications for virtually every bar taker. If you're a 2021 bar taker, you might be sitting there smugly thinking it doesn't impact you. I suspect it will. You and I, Megan, have talked about this. We just don't see this being a one-off event and we're all good come February 2021. I think there's going to be a ripple effect. And so I think it's good to understand that, know what's going on. I know we've got a lot of you who are signing up right now for 2021 exams. Start your studies now. Start doing all the things you have to do. Be very aware of what these rules are. We will keep you informed in these weekly webinars. And, just don't get caught unaware. Right. I mean, know what the rules are.
Yeah. Yep. Keep studying. Keep going. No matter when your exam date is, as of right now, keep studying. You will not regret it. You will not regret the time you put in now. So do it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, listen, thank you, Megan. That's our episode for this week. I hope it's been helpful for you and informative. We'll continue to keep you updated as things occur. I would expect this upcoming week to be an even busier week as more jurisdictions make decisions about what they're going to be doing specifically with respect to the end of July or into September and now October. So, want to just remind you before we sign off, our special free training. It's called Now is the Best Time to Take Your Bar Exam. You can register by clicking on the link on the show notes or right below the video if you're watching the video, or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/now. Look forward to seeing you in that special training on Saturday or on Tuesday. I hope everybody has a great week. Stay healthy and safe, and we will look forward to seeing you next week here and along the Extra Mile. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.